Welcome to the Autism ADHD Podcast. It's the place to be for neurodiversity affirming parents and professionals. I'm your host, Holly Blanc Moses, the mom neurodivergent therapist. Here we chat about emotional regulation, mental health, social support, executive functioning, learning, and more, all aimed at empowering us to support kids and teens with compassion and understanding. I'm thrilled that you joined me today, and I've got some pretty exciting news to share with you. For those rock star therapists listening right now, I've created continuing education training that is tailor-made for you. Take a deep dive into cutting-edge strategies that you can start using today. The CEs you've wanted for so long are finally here. Go to hollyblancmoses.com/CE training and sign up. You are going to love it. The link is also available in the show notes. Now, if you are a parent or educator listening and you know a therapist or a psychologist that is passionate about supporting kids and teens, I greatly appreciate it if you could pass on this great news. Thanks so much again for your support, and let's get started. Welcome, Stephanie Malia Krauss, to the Autism ADHD Podcast.
Oh, Holly, I am so glad to be with you today.
I am so glad to be with you today. We were doing some back and forth with timing this morning as both busy moms. It's real life.
Yeah, absolutely. Right before recording started, I was getting sunscreen out of my 14-year-old's eye as he prepared for the first day of summer camp. And I was trying for independence and having him do all of the sunscreen by himself as a near high schooler, and still ended up with sunscreen all over his eyelashes.
Sunscreen is tricky. It's the application process, how close to get it to your eye, it's a lot. But everyone who's listening completely gets where we're coming from. So yeah. I'm going to introduce you real quick. Stephanie is a social worker, educator, and author who focuses on helping young people thrive now and into the future. She is the founder of First Quarter Strategies and the author of Whole Child, Whole Life, Making It What Today's Kids Need for Tomorrow's World, and the forthcoming Wired to Thrive today. We are talking about valuing the person over productivity. As a society, we do this without even thinking about it. We have turned productivity into really deciding how valuable a person is. For example, our kids, right? They wake up, they're constantly being measured by what they get done, what they achieve, how fast did they eat breakfast? Did you do your homework? How many activities are you in? How many clubs are you in? Are you in this social group? Right? Like even our compliments are all about this hustle. Work so hard, look at what you've accomplished. And schools are really set up this way, celebrating perfect attendance, right? Pushing advanced classes so kids could get into this quote unquote good colleges. I hear this a lot from some of the kids that I see. They're so worried about not getting into a good college. Sports, and if you're not winning, then you're what, Stephanie?
You're losing.
You're losing. So I remember an English teacher I had in high school, and now again, I love educators, so I'm not trashing. I'm just using this as an example. I was not a cheerleader or in sports. I'm clumsy. Okay, so that was not for me. And she graded theirs differently. So the kids that were really trying to get an A in the class, they were getting lower grades than they typically would. The football players, the cheerleaders got really high grades. When we looked at the permanent product, which is the essays, it didn't make sense. So we told on her. And the principal didn't believe us. And she stood in front of the class and said, I heard that you were complaining to the whole class. I heard you were complaining that I was giving the kids in sports and cheerleaders a higher grades. And I don't care if you're a cheerleader or a football player or a nobody.
Oh my gosh.
So Stephanie, of course, I had to stand up and raise my hand and ask her, does that put me in the nobody category? She didn't like that. So feeling you're only as good as what you produce, not just kids, but also parents and therapists and educators. When our kids and ourselves, we think that our worth depends on how much we accomplish, then you can't rest because that's being lazy or not doing enough. And I don't know about you, but I certainly do struggle with this. The idea of value and productivity is especially brutal for neurodivergent kids. These kids learn to push themselves way past the breaking point. I think a lot of us as parents do that too, right? Because we want to prove that we're not lazy. We want to prove that we're good. We want to prove that we're worthy, which means that if we don't meet those expectations, then we're just not. It's like you have to earn a place in this world by constantly doing and doing well. So you and I are going to flip the script for our kids and ourselves. Like, how great would it be, Stephanie, that people were valuable because they were just people?
Absolutely.
How great would that be? All right, so we're going to jump into questions. Are you ready?
Ready.
Let's do it. There was an article that you actually wrote, and I thought, oh my goodness, I have to meet her. She's so fabulous. So it was for Campfire, wasn't it? You talk about our culture's productivity focus. It sends this message to kids. Your value comes from what you produce. Let's talk about why this is particularly difficult for neurodivergent kids and teens.
Yeah, absolutely. Holly, as you were talking, I was thinking about in the book that I'm working on right now, Wired to Thrive, which basically is saying we're not doing a very good job humaning right now, being human beings. What does it take to be in the world, to be fully alive and awake in the world? I get into this grind culture or hustle culture. And I talk about this cartoon that I saw years ago that actually was meant to depict abusive relationships. And it's possible that you've seen the cartoon. There's a man who gets yelled at work and he comes home and he yells at his wife. And the wife turns around and yells at the kid, and the kid turns around and kicks the cat. And what I talk about in this chapter called overtapped, about not having enough time and resources, all of the days that we have, all of the hours, there's never enough time, is that we have a similar toxic culture when it comes to productivity, where we as the adults feel chronically, constantly overwhelmed and overworked. And then we turn around and we put it on our kids, whether those are kids who we're raising or working with. And then the older kids actually turn around to the younger kids, and you can hear, like kicking the cat, they'll say, you just wait until you get to high school. You just wait until you get to middle school. You just wait until you get to college. And so we're all doing this to each other. To your question about what this means for young people who are differently wired, I think we need to actually step back and look at this bigger context. So, for the last 5 years since the pandemic, I have been live polling any group of educators, youth workers, parents, coaches, people who work with and raise young people wherever I've gone in the country. So, I've been all over the country, virtually and in person, and I always ask the same three questions. How are your kids? How are their families? And how are you? And across those 5 years, the answers, regardless of community, have always been the same. Every group of adults who is responsible for the care of kids is saying, no matter where they are in the country, no matter what time in the past 5 years, that the kids, their families, and they are overwhelmed, overloaded, tired, exhausted, and stressed out. And the only shift that I've seen in the past 5 years is that the question about how are the kids has moved from the young people being tired to being exhausted or burned out. So you think about young people who are differently wired and how much energy they are expending already to try to conform and contort themselves to a culture and a society and a way of doing things that doesn't map to or match with how their brains and bodies work naturally. And so they're constantly in what one researcher called for me when we were talking social jet lag. Like you're just always not quite in the same time zone or quite in click with the general mass of folks. And so if everyone universally is feeling constantly, chronically overloaded and overwhelmed and stressed and exhausted, and then you have a group of young people who are having to expend so much more energy in an already overwhelming and overloaded context, then you can only imagine. I think, as a mom of kids who are differently wired, for those who are listening who they themselves are differently wired, like we also feel it. There's a level of not just overwhelm, but depletion that we really have to contend with. And if we're not careful, if our kids don't feel well enough supported, that depletion can quickly make its way to feeling demoralized. From I can't get it done to what is wrong with me? Why can I not only fit in, but keep up? Which is for me such a devastation in this particular moment because I actually think that in a time in history where technology and AI and automation and all of these things are what they are, that we need humans to be humaning and we need our neurodivergent kids to be bringing the whole big, beautiful totality of who they are more than ever before.
I was tearing up a little bit, Stephanie, when you were saying, what's wrong with me?
Yeah.
That is so sad to me. This is often what the kids I see in my office will tell me. And it's definitely what I grew up with. What is wrong with me? What is wrong with me? I'm not like them. I should be this. This is heavy. And you can see how anxiety and depression can absolutely occur for these kids and adults when they're constantly not measuring up in a way that society expects them to. Then there must be something wrong, right? They must be lazy or they must not be trying hard enough. What you mentioned socially, I think, is important too. Kids have to put in so much more energy and it's incredible amount of effort to just have a few sentences with someone. What if I say something wrong? What if I'm weird? It's a huge risk, right? This idea that they're showing up like everyone else to do school or any kind of activity, just like everyone else, it's not true. It's massive amount of energy and effort. Then the executive functioning, I think that's a huge thing. You mentioned AI. We've never had so many ways to be able to stay organized. So it must be your fault, right? If you're not. And then you take that on. Learning differences are more likely to occur in neurodivergent kids. Then you're not smart, right? You're not smart like these other kids. And we got to get them to catch up. Got to get them to catch up. We're comparing and not even really realizing we're comparing, I think.
It's interesting. One of the things that I've been digging into a lot recently, Holly, is, and it's related, again, you mentioned earlier, I'm working on this new book, Wired to Thrive. And so Wired to Thrive really is meant to answer this question of why are we so overwhelmed and overloaded? What are the kind of weather conditions of modern life that are truly different from the past? How are we weathering the storm? And what was so interesting in diving into the research on that, so some of those weather conditions are what we talked, being overscheduled, being overworked, this focus on productivity, also being overstimulated, that's another one. And then the like overwrought, the existential dread, just the fear of the future and the levels of anxiety that I know I'm definitely subject to. But related to this conversation, it's all related to this conversation, what we're finding is that the very parts of being a human being that have allowed us to evolve for all of time, have allowed us to endure challenge and to enjoy life, are the very things that modern life makes it really hard to do. And so a couple of those are things like being able to sleep the way that we need to sleep, being able to move our bodies the way that we need to move our bodies, to regulate the way that we need to regulate. And so, again, you look at young people who are neurodivergent or they're grown-ups, and we know that things like sleep and movement and regulation, as three examples of many, are vitally important. And so you already have this, I can't keep up. What is wrong with me? Social jet lag phenomenon. But then you have the potential for either I'm trying to keep up and I'm staying up late and I'm losing sleep because it takes me so much longer what I can't do in school. I have to do when I get home in a particular set of conditions because the conditions are not right for me to focus or learn. And now I'm not getting the sleep that I need. Or in school, I need to move my body. And yet we say, sit still, sit in your seat, all of these things that are really meant, again, to conform or to comply. And those being markers along with productivity of what it means to be successful, what it means to be good, what it means to be a good student, a good person, a good kid. And so there are these vicious cycles that our neurodivergent kids are constantly grappling with. The good news is that the protective factors of having wonderful people and supports who know them and get them and understand them and provide supportive, healthy, healing environments can remedy or even reverse those effects, but they are living in this world where those are the constant cues that they're getting.
As caregivers, as therapists, as educators, we can step back and really question, what am I requiring of this person? And does it even align with their neurology? Say you are using all of your energy to be seated in class all day. If that's all your energy, then you're not going to be able to hear what the instructor is saying. You're not going to be able to think through the work. How are you going to take a test? Considering the sensory needs of some people, that can be incredibly difficult, just the environment. Then you might be criticized because you don't do well on a test, or you forget to hand in your assignment because you do have executive functioning differences. You can see how all of this will just pile on for someone to feel like they're just never good enough. And no matter what they do, they're just not good enough.
It also starts early. As you're talking, I'm reminded of when my son was in kindergarten. He was my older son. He had to get pulled out of class to be evaluated. And so the specialist pulls him out. He has no idea. He's a kid who needs structure and routine. This is an unpredictable, this grown up he's never seen before, opens the door to the kindergarten classroom, calls his name, embarrasses him. He goes and he sits down. And when we got the results of the evaluation, the specialist said he sobbed through the whole thing. And here's what our evaluation said. And I questioned it. And I said, is this an evaluation of how my son performs under duress when he's sobbing and anxious and so upset? Or is this truly an evaluation of what he knows and can do? And there was such a disconnect for that specialist of not being able to understand that what she had tested was my son under a certain set of conditions, meaning he couldn't even take the test initially because he was so upset. That's not a measure of what he knows or can do. So back to like, how are we measuring things? It's not only productivity, but it's this idea that you have to be able to perform and produce under a particular set of conditions. And that if you can't, that also means you're somehow not a good learner or not a good worker. And so I do think we see so many situations where when young people are supported by grown-ups who get them, that they can perform and produce in really powerful, beautiful ways. Because we also want them to feel purpose and a sense of contribution and a sense of service and competence. And it's so important to see same kid, two different scenarios, two separate sets of conditions, how they perform differently or how they produce differently.
That makes so much sense. We want any assessment to be valid and reliable. That just speaks so much to how things are set up. Is it reliable taking a test in an environment where you can't move and then it's loud? There's distraction in the hallway, the lighting is buzzing, all these things that we really have to keep in mind. No wonder there's a lot of overwhelm. I love that you were talking about that poll. As adults, we'll talk about overwhelm and feeling drained and all these things, burnout, but we don't acknowledge that this is also happening for kids. We just expect them to keep on going and trudging through. And it sounds like an excuse sometimes when they say, I'm too tired or I just can't do anymore. What are your thoughts about that?
Young people are genuinely exhausted. And I think that there are a couple of things that we need to consider as caregivers, whether we're raising kids or working with them or both. The first is that we are living and working longer than ever in human history. And
Mm.
so it is, it should deeply concern us if young people are saying, I feel burned out, I'm too tired, I can't do this, and they are 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, they're tweens and teens, because it is possible that they are going to live as an expectation to be 100 instead of an exception. Like science has advanced enough, medicine has advanced enough that our kids, if they have the right resources and opportunities, they will be kept alive until their 90s or until they're 100 or older. But staying alive that long does not mean that you're enjoying your life that long. And so we really have to consider what are the ramifications of young people who are sprinting so soon in life when they may need to be learning and working for 60, 70, 80 more years after they reach adulthood. They're basically facing a lifetime of work in adulthood. Because of that, we have to reorient ourselves. For those of us who are in the kid space, raising and working with kids, historically, we've thought about 18 as the cutoff and they move into adulthood. And our goal is to get them through high school into whatever is next. And that it's like a baton handoff. But we are really preparing these young people for an ultra marathon in very tough conditions. And the training for that has to look differently. And so I think about it a lot from the perspective of how do we shift from the goal being get them ready for college, get them ready for careers, get them through high school, to the goal being get them to be able to have a long and livable and lovable life. And if the goal is longevity, they can live for a long time, livability, they do have the skills and the knowledge to make it in a crazy, often unfair and unjust world, but also lovability. Like life is hard. They should be able to enjoy life, to have a good life. If those are the goals, then what I do in childhood and how I advocate and how I show up for my kids begins to shift. For example, mental health takes a much stronger precedence. That same kid I was telling you about, I've written about it publicly. He's given me permission to share. He struggles with OCD. So if his OCD flares up really intensely, that takes priority over academics, over sports, over everything else, because I know that's a chronic condition that he's going to have for the rest of his life, but he's not going to have me next to him for the rest of his life. And so the priority becomes what are the tips, tricks, and tools he needs to navigate being a kid with OCD in a world that uses having OCD as a phrase to describe why they're organized, which is not how it works in his life. And so the priorities shift because I'm supporting my kids for this ultra marathon. So, what I would say is how we show up as parents and counselors and teachers and youth workers also has to shift. That instead of saying we're just getting them to complete something, complete the school year, complete the class, complete the program, complete high school. No, we are caring and preparing for these kids in a rapidly changing, very volatile and uncertain world. And they are going to have to keep trekking, trudging, and sprinting through that for many years to come. And what resources will that take? And what skills and supports will that take?
I agree. And I think you're right. Shifting those goals can make all of the difference. If we were to step back and look at a goal, get good grades, get into a good college, this idea of good, which I don't like that word, honestly, Stephanie. My own history with the word good. And also, I see how it can be turned on to kids and then they put that on themselves. They're not, again, good enough. But this idea of you're not going to be able to take care of yourself if it's this constant pressure. And I think parents are feeling this pressure. We often take the pressure we feel and put it on another person. Like you mentioned in that comic, we're worried, so we put it on them. But if that goal was, I want my child to have a life they love instead of a life they hate,
That's right.
that long life you were speaking of, do we really want them to hate their life for the next 80 years? Of course, we don't want that for them. But is that what we're doing by this pressure and this comparison and these expectations that often don't really make a lot of sense? We're saying it's better to push past your limits, right? Because if you push past your limits, then at least you're going to get some recognition. If you stretch yourself to the point that you're breaking, then you might get some praise. Let's say you got these grades, but no one's looking at the other side of that. How did that actually happen? A lot of our watchers and listeners know that I struggle with pretty significant chronic illness. And I got sick my freshman year in college. And it is an organic disease. I understand that. But I do think that the amount of stress was so significant that it made my disease so much worse. I remember my freshman year, there was a professor in the psychology department. It was intro to psychology. And she said, if you aren't doing research, if you aren't getting straight A's, if you aren't constantly volunteering, if you aren't doing teaching hours, you're not going to get into a good clinical psych program. You're just not. It had such a big impact on me that I'm not going to be able to do what I want if I don't do all of these things. So then the expectation was laid down in front of me. I'm sure that contributed to me being in the hospital all the time. The stress that we put on ourselves and our kids breaks down not only our mental health, but our physical health. And neurodivergent kids are more likely to have different physical ailments as well. We have to really think about not just this pressure of productivity, but what is the expense? This isn't maybe a popular way to look at it in our society. Number one for us and our family is mental health every single time. Now, I'm doing better about it for myself, but for the kids, that is before school, that is before everything. Because if they are struggling with their mental health, the other stuff is going to pile on top of it and it's just going to get even more difficult. Do you see that as well?
I do. I also just want to name that we do know that stress has an incredible inflammatory response in our bodies and that it sets off all kinds of chemicals in a way that when we get short bursts of it, like the stress that you get from running, does a kind of breakdown rebuild that we need and want. But when we have it at a toxic level all the time, where daily life is stressful because of the conditions, because of the people, because of the settings, it has serious health impacts. And we are seeing the rise of chronic diseases and illnesses in ways that we have never before. And there are all kinds of reasons why, but a huge contributor to them is unchecked stress. And even our resiliency levels, in the same way that you can have healthy stress and healthy resilience. Healthy stress is you face a challenge, and the resilience is you can bounce back from it. If you've got toxic levels of stress, that's going to cause toxic levels of resiliency of why am I constantly having to bounce back all of the time, every single day? And what we're seeing is just this fraying of health and wholeness and feeling sick. And that's at a holistic level. In fact, there is a conversation, a set of conversations being co-hosted by Campfire, where you got that article, and Serious Fun Network, which is a network of camps for kids with serious chronic health conditions, with all kinds of camp leaders from across the United States to really weigh in on the fact that the super focus right now that schools have on addressing chronic attendance issues, kids not coming to school 100% of the time, has actually led unintentionally to the sort of swing that is too far over, where they're not attending to the needs of kids with chronic conditions. Though, so the kids who were already going to have difficulties showing up to school every day, where we now know from the pandemic that we have ways to support them virtually and flexibly that we didn't realize we could before, that they're actually being penalized for not being in their seat and being physically present every day. I just want to name for your listeners and for you, Holly, that it's so hard, even knowing what I know. I have these two beautiful kids wired all the way that they are in their unique way. And I often tell my girlfriends that I feel complicit in my own life, that I know the research on healthy development and mental health and physical health and the brain science on executive functioning and all of these things, the science on sleep and movement, everything we've been talking about. But I still wake my kids up, they're middle schoolers, every morning for school earlier than their bodies and brains are ready. And I pack them into cars and I take them to a school that is highly ranked. It's a public school in our neighborhood, but where they are forced into their seat for hours a day into a structure where lunch is at 10:15 in the morning, where instead of having playtime, they have what they call pavement time, where they just stand outside. And then they board buses at the end of the day, and they go through these schedules that I don't know what else to do because I'm a working parent and I don't have another option. And there are people who give up all kinds of things to try and create a different option, whether that's homeschooling or private school. But there is just this reality of like us living in modern life where I just want to name for your listeners that there's still, even in my own life, a disconnect between what I know is healthy and good and right for my own children and what I'm able to provide. And my job is just on a daily basis to try and close the gap as much as I can and to surround my kids with as many of the moments and experiences that I can that are protective and that are healing and healthy to try and offset the situations that I can't control. But it's hard. It's really difficult.
It is hard. And I appreciate your authenticity because there aren't a ton of options. So recognizing what can we help with? Like you said, how can we fill those gaps? It could be thinking about the words you're going to use in this interaction. Are you bringing gasoline to a kid on fire for the interaction? Not a good idea, right? Are you finding that you're feeling stressed about your child's grade? If you have open communication and they feel safe with you and they know that their value isn't about that A or that productivity, they are valuable because they are who they are. Then they're going to be able to feel safe with you. They're going to be able to tell you, why is math hard? What part is difficult for them? Or if they are being bullied, they can tell you that. There's so many beautiful ways that we can support our kids, even when it doesn't feel like we have a whole lot of options.
I agree. I also think that for anybody who's listening to this who is just worried. They just want their kids to be okay, and they just want them to show up and have friends and do well in school and get that diploma and have a good life, back to using the word good. But often we pressure our kids to conform and produce because we're scared. It is so hard and so vulnerable to watch our kids not work within the systems and settings that they're supposed to work in. Like school is supposed to work for them. It's school and friendship should be easy. And the reality is that we have our kids contending not only with a weird time in the world and these uncertain, volatile conditions, but they still experienced the pandemic during really critical developmental windows, and that has had a lasting impact. And then they're navigating the more timeless features of life. And so it is important for a couple of things. One, that they know that you have their back and that you are that soft place to land and that you are going to be with them. But the other thing is, we ourselves as adults, we have to actually update and upgrade what we know success looks like and requires. Because out of our fear, and out of our concern for our kids, we might think that success is conforming and getting things finished and going on to college. But if we go back to the sort of long livable life, the job market is being reshaped radically. And our education systems are being reshaped radically. This is a very shifty, reshaping time, which means what it's going to take to be a good worker and to be able to make it in a changing world, it's different than what was required for us. And actually, we don't want our kids to fall in line with a more conforming kind of factory model. They have to be able to think in unique and different ways. They have to be able to show up in unique and different ways. They're going to be looking at incredibly complex problems that we've never seen before, truly unprecedented. And so we need unprecedented ways of thinking. I mentioned a moment ago, Holly, about my son who struggles with OCD. And I was interviewing a woman, Natasha Daniels, who has a great podcast for families whose kids struggle with OCD and anxiety, and called At Parenting. And we were talking about this is the moment where I want to see kids who are neurodivergent and who have OCD and anxiety actually like leading the revolution to be like, you're afraid, you're overwhelmed, you feel like you can't get it done. Welcome. Like, we have been here for a while and we have some strategies for you and we are here for you. I would just love to see this giant flip happen because I actually think, really believe with conviction that our neurodivergent and our anxious and our little bit obsessive kids, that they know how to do this world that we're all reeling from in ways that many of us do not. And they bring expertise and skill and strategy that really need to be honored and uplifted, and there are real leadership roles there.
I appreciate so much that you said that, because this idea of it has to be or it should be this one way, there's so many lovely ways you can do life.
Here's the thing that's happening, Holly, like related to that, there are kids every day, whether they're neurodivergent or not, who are landing in adulthood and saying, I did everything right. I did everything you told me. I burned myself out. I exhausted myself taking the AP classes and specializing in one sport and going to the early bird classes and doing all the things you told me to do. And I am not okay. Like, I'm not ready and I'm not well. And I don't want this to be my life. And I don't know how you feel as a mom, but for me, that is the last thing that I want for my kids.
I know that if I were to push them in a way not built, right, they are going to think that they fail all the time because that measuring stick isn't made for them. It doesn't even make sense, right? Those thoughts will come up where I'm not doing enough as far as parenting. I'm not doing enough. I'm worried about my child. And maybe if we took a step back and say, am I stressing out over things that have to do with this old idea of productivity and value? Maybe that's something that you grew up with that was a struggle for you. I know it was for me. What a beautiful gift to ourselves as parents that maybe we weren't bad. Maybe we were good enough the entire time, just the way that we are. I love your message about valuing kids because they're valuable, not because of an award or showing up to school on time every day. It's a very different way to live life and a different way to think. Also, recognizing when we feel pressure. I certainly do with comments about us homeschooling. Somehow it's not real school, or my son's not playing sports, so they should be. And these criticisms that we get from the people around us, and even within our own families, recognizing that, stepping back and saying, how do I want to support my child? Because I don't need to live up to other people's expectations, and neither do they, to prove that they're worthy. Thank you so much, Stephanie. This is such a beautiful and lovely conversation. And also, I love your book. I have it, by the way, The Whole Child. But tell us more about you and where our watchers and listeners can see about your services and your books.
So the best way to get in contact with me is by going to my website, stephaniemaliakrauss.com. And if you pop a note through the website, it comes directly to me. We can be in conversation together. If you're interested in actually getting some resources around how to support young people's healthy development and their wholeness, you can go to wholechildwholelife.com, and that has access to the latest book, Whole Child, Whole Life, but it also has some freebies that you can download and use and that really work in a variety of ways. Again, if you're caring for kids in any capacity, whether they're your own or somebody else's. So stephaniemaliakrauss.com or wholechildwholelife.com. Probably content for another conversation, Holly, but I am off of most social media platforms because of my own platform being about the health and well-being of young people. I actually took myself off platforms that were hurting and harming them. So if folks are trying to find me on Instagram or X or other places, you won't be able to, but I would love to be in conversation with you on email, or you can find me on LinkedIn. Not very active there, but I am there.
I love that you're doing that because social media does stress me out.
Mm-hmm.
So good point. Good point. I will make sure to have the links to your two websites down below so people can come and find you. And again, thank you so much for coming on and hanging out with me today.
Oh, it was an absolute pleasure. And I just want to leave everybody with that thought that it's time for our kids to lead the revolution, that they are wired in exactly the ways that we need right now more than ever before. And I hope that you can just sit in that and celebrate that this week.
Thanks so much, Stephanie. I'll see you next time.
All right,
Bye-bye.
take good care.
If you found this podcast helpful, I greatly appreciate it if you could take a second to give it a 5-star review. With your positive feedback, I can continue bringing you free, valuable information. In the show notes, you'll find links to free resources on supporting neurodivergent kids and teens with social interaction, emotional regulation, and more. So come on down to the show notes and get your free resources. Take care, and I look forward to seeing you next time.
All content provided is protected under applicable copyright, patent, trademark, and other proprietary rights. All content is provided for informational and educational purposes only. No content is intended to be a substitute for professional medical or psychological diagnosis, advice, or treatment. Information provided does not create an agreement for service between Holly Blanc Moses Crossvine Clinical Group, the interviewee, Holly Blanc Moses LLC, and the recipient. Consult your physician regarding the applicability of any opinions or recommendations with respect to your symptoms or medical condition or the symptoms or medical condition of your family member. Children or adults who show signs of dangerous behavior toward themselves and or others should be placed immediately under the care of a qualified professional.